It was just past 8 on a crisp November morning when Michael Ainsley stepped out of his apartment building on East 14th Street. The city hummed with energy, Union Square already buzzing with commuters, joggers, and the faint scent of roasted nuts from the corner stand. Michael, always early, always composed, adjusted his scarf and made his way toward his favorite cafe, a small independent spot nestled between a bookstore and a juice bar. He ordered his usual, black coffee, no sugar, and nodded politely at the barista who already knew his name. It was an ordinary day, or so it seemed. Michael crossed the street with coffee in hand, pausing momentarily to toss a few coins into the violin case of a street performer playing a haunting rendition of Clair de Lune. A brief smile crossed his lips. Then he turned, and that was the last anyone ever saw of him. Before we dive deeper into this chilling mystery, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable true stories that defy explanation. Michael Ainsley was 31. A successful architect working with one of the most respected firms in Manhattan. He had a bright future ahead and no known enemies. He was methodical, reserved, and dependable to a fault. Every weekday he followed the same pattern. Wake up at 6:30, run 4 miles around the East River, shower, grab coffee, and head to the office by 9. That routine never varied until that day. His younger sister, Rachel Ainsley, described him as the most stable person I've ever known. They spoke every morning via text after his coffee stop, often trading jokes or quick updates. When her phone remained silent that day, she felt a chill. At first, she dismissed it. Maybe his battery had died. But by noon, with no word and calls going straight to voicemail, her concern turned into panic. Rachel called his office. He hadn't arrived. She called the coffee shop. Yes, he had come in right on time. Then silence. She filed a missing persons report just before 3 p.m. It hadn't even been a full day, but something deep inside told her this wasn't just a delay or a miscommunication. Something was wrong. Back at Union Square, the day had unfolded without incident. Surveillance cameras from nearby businesses showed Michael walking along the sidewalk sipping his coffee. At 8:17 a.m. he passed by the violinist. At 8:19 he turned a corner, then vanished. No more footage, no strange behavior, just gone. The NYPD treated the case as a voluntary disappearance at first. Adults go missing every day, many by choice. Maybe he'd had a breakdown. Maybe he'd walked away from his life. But that theory didn't make sense. His bank accounts remained untouched. His phone had not pinged any towers beyond Union Square. And Michael had never shown signs of instability, stress, or dissatisfaction. He loved his job, had recently been promoted, and was in the early stages of designing a new community center in Brooklyn, his most ambitious project yet. Rachel refused to accept the idea that he had simply walked away. He wouldn't do that, she told detectives over and over. Michael doesn't just vanish. As the hours passed and no leads emerged, Union Square, one of the most watched and populated areas in Manhattan, became the epicenter of one of the city's most puzzling cases. How could someone disappear in broad daylight, surrounded by hundreds of people, without leaving a single clue? What no one knew then was that the key to Michael's disappearance had been in plain sight all along, just hidden behind something everyone saw every day but never truly noticed. The story of Michael Ainsley was just beginning. Rachel couldn't sit still. After filing the report, she walked the route Michael usually took every morning, retracing every step from his apartment to Union Square. She paused outside the cafe where he'd ordered his last coffee, staring at the sidewalk, as if the answers might rise from the cracks in the pavement. The barista confirmed the time. Michael had picked up his drink around 8:15 a.m., just like always. He looked calm, polite, normal. But something wasn't normal. Michael always texted her after getting coffee. It was a ritual. Even just a quick thumbs-up emoji or made it alive again joke. That Tuesday morning her phone stayed silent. She remembered refreshing her messages, then calling him repeatedly as hours ticked by. By the time she called the police, dread had swallowed her whole. The NYPD assigned the case to a junior officer initially. He was polite, professional, but clearly unconvinced anything serious had happened. Sometimes people just need a break, he told her, Men his age, successful, single. They disappear for a few days and then come back. Rachel wanted to scream. Michael wasn't impulsive. He didn't do unplanned weekends or spiritual retreats. If he left, something was terribly wrong. Surveillance footage quickly became the focal point. Dozens of cameras dotted Union Square. In the subway station, outside the shops, embedded in lampposts. At first glance, they offered a clear narrative. At 8:17 a.m., Michael walked past the violinist. At 8:18, he stood briefly at the corner, sipped his coffee, then turned west, toward 17th Street. Then, nothing. No more images. No departure through the subway entrance. No crossing of the next intersection. He vanished within a single block. Police reviewed footage from every angle. One camera showed him from behind, coffee in one hand, the other slipping into his coat pocket. His gait was relaxed. Another clip showed him reflected briefly in a shop window, just his silhouette. After that, he was gone. It made no sense. Detectives canvassed the area. No signs of struggle, no items dropped. Street vendors didn't remember anything strange. One said, "He was just another guy in a coat, nothing stood out." Union Square, with its constant flow of people, could swallow a man whole. But Rachel couldn't accept that her brother had simply walked into thin air. By the end of the first day, hope already felt like it was slipping. That night, Rachel sat in Michael's apartment. Everything was as he left it. His jacket hung by the door. His computer was open on the kitchen counter. A folder with architectural renderings lay next to a half-eaten protein bar. There was no note, no signs of distress. Just ordinary life frozen mid-sentence. His keys and wallet were on the table. He had clearly planned to return home. The police returned the next morning for a deeper sweep. They found nothing suspicious. No evidence of a break-in, no threatening letters, no unexplained purchases. His last text was to a co-worker the night before. "See you at 10, I'll grab us coffee." That message painted a picture of a man not planning to vanish. Rachel refused to let it go. She started her own campaign, printing flyers, posting on social media, talking to local news. A few volunteers helped her cover the park and nearby streets with Michael's face. Within 2 days, hundreds of posters surrounded Union Square. She stood near the subway entrance holding a stack, repeating the same plea. "Have you seen my brother?" The public started to take notice. Local blogs picked up the story. People were shocked. A man disappearing during morning rush hour in one of the busiest parts of Manhattan. It seemed impossible, but there it was. The pressure grew on the police. By the end of the week, they assigned a more experienced detective to the case. His name was Harold Shaw, a veteran of the NYPD Missing Persons Unit. Shaw had solved dozens of high-profile disappearances. He was calm, measured, and skeptical. He believed in evidence, not instincts. But even he couldn't deny that Michael Ainsley's case was different. When Shaw reviewed the footage, he watched it again and again. Something bothered him. It wasn't just that Michael disappeared. It was how easily it happened, like the city had simply absorbed him, leaving no trace. He scribbled a single note in his notebook. "Find the space between the frames." Rachel Ainsley didn't sleep. In the days following Michael's disappearance, she became a fixture in Union Square, passing out flyers, answering tips, and watching people stream past her brother's last known location. She stood with a photo of him taped to her chest, eyes scanning every face. "Maybe someone saw something," she'd say to anyone who paused. "Maybe someone remembers." At first, only a handful of people offered help. But the story gained traction. By the end of the week, local news channels were covering it. Michael's photo appeared on screen, his clean-cut smile and gentle eyes now symbols of something far more ominous: how a man could be swallowed by a city. The more she spoke to reporters, the more determined Rachel became. She refused to let the narrative dissolve into silence. She organized a candlelight vigil in the square 1 week after he vanished. Hundreds of people showed up, friends, co-workers, strangers. They lit candles, held signs, and whispered prayers. Some wept. Others stood in stunned silence, watching the candles flicker against the night. Rachel stepped onto a park bench and addressed the crowd. "My brother is out there. He didn't just vanish. Someone knows something. Please don't stop looking." Her voice cracked, but her resolve didn't. Detective Shaw watched from a distance. He didn't like public displays. They made investigations harder, stirred up false leads. But something about Rachel's clarity impressed him. She was articulate, forceful, and painfully precise. He introduced himself after the vigil, and she didn't waste time. "I don't need sympathy," she told him. "I need results." Shaw nodded. "Then let's find him." He started by reviewing every bit of Michael's life. His work at Ainsley Plus Towers, a boutique architectural firm in Midtown, showed no signs of trouble. His co-workers described him as focused, talented, and kind. No recent arguments, no enemies. His last completed project was a historical renovation in Brooklyn Heights. His desk was tidy, blueprints neatly stacked, and his calendar full of meetings for the following week. Rachel gave Shaw access to Michael's email, social media, and phone records. There were no strange messages, no signs of distress, but Shaw noticed something curious. Michael rarely called people. Almost all of his communication was by text or email. When he did call, it was brief, efficient, clean. Shaw jotted down another note. Private, controlled. Who knew what he was really thinking? Then came something odd. 2 weeks before his disappearance, Michael had withdrawn $600 in cash from his checking account, an unusual move for someone who used his debit card for everything. No one knew what he did with the money. It didn't appear to be used. No large purchases, no travel. Just gone. The trail led next to his friends. Most of them were fellow architects or college acquaintances. Rachel helped Shaw build a list. He met with several. Some were shocked, others visibly shaken. One friend, Jordan Ellis, had known Michael since college and worked with him at Ainsley Plus Towers. He was stressed lately, Jordan admitted, but not the kind of stress that makes you disappear, more like restless, like he was waiting for something. Waiting for what? Shaw asked. Jordan shrugged. He didn't say, but last month he stopped going out after work, started skipping happy hour, even stopped going to the gym. It was weird. Rachel hadn't noticed the changes. Michael had always been private. He didn't share much unless asked directly. But now the little things took on new meaning. Then came the first curious statement. A woman named Lena, who ran a vintage shop near the cafe Michael visited, told Shaw she'd seen him that morning. He was acting different, she said, kept glancing across the street while waiting for his coffee. Not paranoid, just like he expected to see someone. Did he? Shaw asked. She shook her head. I don't think so. He left fast. It wasn't much, but it was something. Back at headquarters, Shaw added that detail to the timeline. 8:15 a.m., coffee. 8:17, seen walking west. 8:18, disappears. What had caught his attention across the street? Who or what had shifted his mood in those final seconds? The camera angles didn't help. Too narrow, too late, too blind to the corners of the square where shadows still lived. Shaw stared at the monitor one last time and murmured under his breath, someone was watching him. Detective Shaw was methodical by nature. He didn't believe in hunches unless they were supported by facts. But Michael's case was testing that discipline. There were no digital breadcrumbs, no financial inconsistencies, no signs of flight or foul play. Just a man who walked into a morning and never walked out of it. Shaw returned to Union Square in the early morning hours, hoping to see it the way Michael did. The air was cold, the streets damp with last night's rain. As he walked the perimeter, something caught his eye. A narrow alley between two old brick buildings, partly hidden behind a construction scaffold. The alley wasn't covered by any camera. He walked closer. The alley was barely wide enough for two people to pass through. Trash bins lined one side, graffiti scarred the other. It smelled of wet cardboard and cigarettes. But Shaw noticed something on the wall. 3 letters faintly etched into the brick, nearly worn away. M.A., Michael Ainsley. Shaw took photos and marked the location. Forensics was called in the next day. They combed the alley for fibers, blood, prints, anything. But there was nothing conclusive, no obvious struggle, no DNA, no definitive sign that Michael had entered it at all. The initials might have meant nothing. Still, Shaw couldn't shake the feeling that this alley mattered. Meanwhile, Rachel pressed harder on her own. She started cross-referencing events in Union Square that day. There had been no protests, no road closures, no scheduled construction. But a few businesses had changed hands in the months prior. New owners, new staff, new security systems. She made a list and visited each one, asking if anyone remembered Michael. At a juice bar across from the cafe, one young employee remembered him vaguely. "He used to come here on Saturdays, I think," she said. "Always tipped well. Polite guy." "Did you see him that Tuesday?" She shook her head. "Not that I recall, but we were slammed. Morning rush." Rachel left her number anyway. Later that day, she received a message from someone who had seen one of the posters. A man named Luis said he'd been walking his dog in the square that morning. "I think I saw your brother, or someone who looked like him. He turned into the alley behind the old bookstore." Rachel's heart leapt. She gave the info to Shaw immediately. "That's the same alley," Shaw confirmed. "But the witness doesn't remember anyone following him." "No." He said Michael looked calm, alone. The alley became the case's first real lead. Still, there were contradictions. Michael's demeanor on camera was composed. The barista said he looked normal. Yet Lena, from the vintage shop, said he kept glancing across the street like he was expecting someone. And now the alley. Did he go there willingly? Did he meet someone? Shaw revisited the footage again, frame by frame. He noticed something curious. Just before Michael turned the corner at 8:18, a delivery truck blocked the view from one of the cameras. The timing was perfect, almost too perfect. It obstructed the only shot that might have shown where Michael actually went. He tracked down the delivery company. Their logs confirmed a drop-off at a bagel shop nearby at 8:20, but the driver didn't remember anything unusual, just another Tuesday. Still, that moment, those 10 seconds behind the truck, bothered Shaw deeply. Another potential break came from the barista, who reached out after reviewing his own memories. "For you know," he said, "I forgot to mention that morning your guy seemed jittery, like he wanted to talk but didn't." "What do you mean?" Shaw asked. He kept hesitating, looked out the window a few times, then back at me, almost like he wanted to ask something but changed his mind. "Did he say anything unusual?" "No, just thanks." But his voice was tight. Like something was off. That shifted the tone of the investigation. If Michael had been worried, why hadn't he told anyone? Why not Rachel? Why not Jordan? Had he sensed something coming? Shaw wrote 2 words in his notebook. Preemptive silence. He didn't know what it meant yet, but it felt like a thread worth pulling. Detective Shaw shifted his focus to Michael's professional life. If Michael had been acting strange in the days leading up to his disappearance, maybe the key wasn't in Union Square, but at his office. Ainsley Plus Towers was a modern, award-winning architectural firm known for its sleek designs and progressive urban planning. Michael wasn't just another employee, he was one of their rising stars. Shaw met with the managing partner, Everett Langston, who spoke highly of Michael. He was brilliant, focused, maybe a little too dedicated. He worked late most nights. We were grooming him for partner by next year. "Any conflicts with colleagues? Disagreements with clients?" Shaw asked. Langston paused. There was some tension with one client, a developer. Big name in Brooklyn real estate, Martin Caulfield. Michael had strong opinions about ethics and zoning. Caulfield didn't like being challenged. "What kind of project?" "A new waterfront complex near Red Hook. Michael thought the plans violated several community standards. He threatened to walk if we pushed forward." "Did he walk?" Langston shook his head. "No." He stayed on. But it got heated. Shaw wrote the name down. Caulfield had a reputation, political connections, deep pockets, and a history of pushing boundaries. Shaw made a note to look into it deeper. Back at the office, Shaw asked to review Michael's email correspondence. Most messages were mundane, project updates, client requests, calendar invites. But 2 stood out. both from Caulfield. The first, sent 3 weeks before the disappearance, was sharp but professional. I expect results, not resistance. The second, 1 week later, was more pointed. You're either with progress or you're in the way. Don't make this personal. The tone was aggressive. Shaw brought the emails to Rachel, who read them with clenched fists. He told me about that guy once, said he was slimy. Said something didn't add up with the permits. Did Michael ever say he felt threatened? No, she said, but he was frustrated. He said the whole project made him feel dirty. The more Shaw learned, the more the theory shifted. Maybe Michael didn't vanish randomly. Maybe his disappearance had a motive rooted in confrontation. The investigation next turned toward Michael's personal life. Rachel mentioned a recent breakup with a woman named Lila Jennings. They had dated for a little over a year. Things had seemed serious, at least to Rachel. But then, about a month before the disappearance, Michael stopped mentioning her altogether. She just kind of disappeared from the conversation, Rachel said. When I asked about her, he said, "It's over. For good." That was all. Shaw tracked Lila down. She wasn't answering calls, so he went to her last known address, a loft in Soho. The building's buzzer didn't work. A neighbor said she hadn't been around in weeks. Her mail was piling up, no signs of activity. He left a card. Nothing came back. Something about that silence echoed too strongly. Meanwhile, forensic reports from Michael's apartment confirmed what was already suspected. No signs of forced entry or violence. The wallet and keys on the table were untouched. His bed was made, the fridge was full. It was as if he had expected to be back in a few hours. In his nightstand drawer, Shaw found a sketchbook, half drawings, half journal entries. Most were technical, plans, site ideas, cityscapes, but one page stood out. It was a rough rendering of Union Square, drawn in graphite. Arrows marked various sightlines. One phrase was scrawled in the margin, "Too many blind spots." That note gnawed at Shaw. It wasn't architectural language, it sounded paranoid, or calculated. He took the sketch to Rachel. "He never showed me that," she said. "Why would he draw the square? He might have thought someone was watching him. Then why didn't he say anything?" Shaw couldn't answer, but the drawing, the notes, the cash withdrawal, they were forming a pattern. Michael hadn't run. He hadn't panicked. He'd been preparing for something. Yet the silence around him was profound. No one knew what exactly had changed, just that something had. Shaw returned to the office and stared again at the alley photo, the initials, the angles. He no longer believed this was random. Someone had wanted Michael gone. Detective Shaw returned to the alley behind the old bookstore, this time with fresh eyes. The space was tight, walled in by aging brick and years of forgotten grime. City maintenance records showed no official use for the passage. No utilities, no deliveries, nothing. It existed like a crack in the urban shell, ignored and unmonitored. He walked slowly, measuring each step, letting the silence guide him. Pigeons fluttered above. A broken fire escape dangled overhead. Then he saw it again, those faint initials, M.A. Not a spray-painted tag, not the work of a vandal. Etched, deliberate. Forensics had already combed the area, but Shaw wasn't looking for fingerprints now. He was looking for logic. If Michael had gone down this alley, why? And where did it lead? The far end was blocked by a chain-link gate wrapped in rusted wire. Beyond it sat an overgrown utility lot and the back wall of a parking garage. Shaw pressed against the fence, peering through the gaps. No security cameras, no lights, just shadows and trash. He requested access from the building management. It took 2 days to get the permits. When they finally opened the gate, the space told its own story. Empty bottles, cigarette butts, scraps of fabric, old tools, and graffiti, lots of it. But something else caught his attention, a large tag in black marker scrawled behind an old dumpster. "I was here," it said, followed by a crude drawing of a face, 2 X's for eyes. Below it, barely visible, were the letters M.A. again, much smaller this time, repeated twice. Was it a cry for help? A signal? Or just coincidence? Back at the precinct, Shaw ordered a sweep of all known homeless activity in the area. He needed to know who might have used that alley, who might have seen something. Then name surfaced: Jonas Spade Ramirez, a drifter who often slept behind the construction scaffolds. He had a record for trespassing, but nothing violent. Shaw found him near the fountain at Washington Square Park, bundled in layers and sipping from a thermos. Spade was wary at first, but opened up after Shaw brought coffee and a clean pair of gloves. "I don't talk to cops," he muttered. "I'm not looking to bust you," Shaw said. "I'm looking for someone, a man who might have gone through that alley 13 days ago." Spade squinted. "That's the alley with the weird hum." "Weird hum?" "Yeah. Metal groans back there, like it's breathing. Spooked me out. I don't go there no more." "Did you see a man, brown coat, short hair, morning of the 2nd? Spade was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "He looked sharp, clean, didn't belong, walked in fast, didn't come out." "You're sure?" "Yeah. I remember because I thought, why's a suit walking into the alley? Thought maybe a drug buy, but he didn't look scared, looked sad." That word hit Shaw harder than he expected. Spade gave no more details. No others in the area claimed to have seen anything. But it was enough. Michael had entered the alley. Of that, Shaw was now certain. Yet the trail still ended there. The forensics team returned, this time with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. They found no human remains. But near the base of the chain-link fence, they uncovered a scrap of fabric wedged between concrete and rust. A piece of fine wool, dark gray, consistent with a suit jacket. Rachel identified it immediately. "That's his," she said, voice breaking. "That's Michael's jacket." The fragment was too degraded for DNA, but the cut, the texture, the faint thread of red stitching, she was sure. The find reignited the case. Media attention surged again. Headlines read, "Union Square Mystery Deepens, Jacket Fragment Found." Rachel stood in front of cameras once more. "We were right. He didn't run. Something happened. Someone knows what." But Shaw didn't hold a press conference. He didn't want to lose control of the narrative. Privately, he circled one question in his notebook. Why that alley? Not a random place, a calculated choice. But by whom? And why hadn't they left more behind? The alley remained under police watch, but the momentum had begun to slow. Weeks turned to months. Leads dried up. Rumors spread. People speculated wildly. Michael had faked his death, joined a cult, fled the country, been abducted. With no body, no witnesses, and only a torn scrap of jacket, the story slipped further from headlines. But Rachel never stopped. She built a website dedicated to Michael's case. She uploaded timelines, footage stills, maps of the area. She opened a tip line. At first, responses were minimal. Mostly strangers offering prayers, a few false sightings. But then, months later, a strange email arrived. No name, no return address. Subject line, "He knew too much." Message, "Look under the sign." That was all. Rachel forwarded the email to Shaw immediately. The message had no traceable metadata. It had been sent from a proxy IP that bounced across 3 continents. Shaw considered it likely a hoax, but Rachel insisted. "What sign?" Shaw asked. "There are 100 signs in Union Square." Still, the phrasing haunted her. He knew too much. The language echoed something Michael had once said about the Brooklyn Project. "It's not just zoning," he had told her. "It's corruption. Deep." That conversation had happened weeks before he vanished. Shaw filed the email. He couldn't act on it yet. Years passed. Rachel moved apartments, changed jobs, but kept the site active. She spoke annually at public safety forums. She lobbied for stronger missing persons legislation. Michael's face remained on bulletin boards in Union Square long after others were replaced. Some people began calling it the ghost case, and still she held onto his jacket, the other one, the one he didn't wear that morning. It hung in her closet like a shrine, untouched. Every anniversary she returned to the square. In 2017 she stood on the corner where he vanished and whispered, "I know you didn't run." In 2019 she sat on the bench near the alley for hours, scanning faces. In 2022 She lit a candle under the signpost across from the cafe, the same one she now suspected the email had referenced. That year she noticed something. The sign had changed. The metal plate bearing parking regulations had been replaced with a digital one. And behind it, a maintenance sticker marked the installation 2021. She made a note. Still, no one listened. Until 2023. During a routine inspection by city workers, a maintenance crew removed the outdated signage to access the power unit behind the digital board. The space was small, boxed in by steel and concrete. As they lifted the old housing plate, something fell from inside, a crumpled piece of fabric, dry and brittle with age. At first they assumed it was trash, but one worker noticed the texture. It was wool. Inside the jacket pocket was a faded business card. The name was barely legible, Michael Ainsley. The jacket had been hidden inside the sign's structural base, wedged behind a panel no one had touched in over a decade. The discovery made news instantly. Rachel was at home when she got the call. She drove straight to the city morgue, where the jacket had been taken for preservation. As soon as she saw the lining, deep charcoal grey with a maroon stripe, she confirmed what forensics had already begun to suspect. It was his. Still, the implications were unclear. Why there? Why after all these years? The email came back to her. Look under the sign. Who had known it was there? Shaw, now retired, was called in for consultation. He stood quietly beside Rachel as she clutched the jacket in her hands. He was close, she whispered. So close. Shaw nodded. 13 years, and all this time, we never looked up. Rachel didn't cry. She had long run dry of tears. But in that moment, something returned. Not relief, not closure, but clarity. Michael hadn't run. He hadn't lost his mind. He had been taken. And someone still unknown, had left behind a trace. The jacket was unmistakably Michael's. The dry cleaning tag inside the collar bore a date. October 30th, 2010, 3 days before he vanished. Rachel remembered him picking it up, commenting how the weather had finally turned. Time for layers, he had joked. Now, 13 years later, it had surfaced behind a street sign. Folded, hidden and forgotten. Forensics examined it meticulously. No blood, no obvious damage. The fabric had deteriorated, but the stitching remained intact. In the inner pocket, behind the business card, they found a single train receipt from the F line. Time-stamped 6:48 a.m., November 2nd, 2010. The same morning he vanished. The destination, Delancey Street. Shaw sat in the precinct conference room, now as a consultant reviewing the map. That train would have put him downtown within 20 minutes, but he didn't take it. He was in Union Square before 8:15. So, why carry the ticket? The new lead detective asked. Rachel had a theory. He might have planned a meeting or a getaway route. Something went wrong. They pulled footage from the Delancey station archives, but after 13 years, much had been lost. No usable visuals from that morning. The receipt was a dead end, unless someone had met him there and convinced him to change course. The jacket re-energized public interest. News outlets ran with it. Break-in cold case missing architect's jacket discovered in Union Square. Online forums exploded with speculation. Reddit threads analyzed the timeline minute by minute. Conspiracy theories flourished again. Black sites, secret informants, experimental surveillance. Rachel ignored most of it. She focused on details. She studied photographs of the sign's previous installation and discovered something odd. In 2011, during a routine infrastructure inspection, the city had sealed several underground electrical units in Union Square. The contractor listed was Garrison Utility Services. That name meant nothing until Shaw recognized it. Garrison handled sub-level wiring across half the city, he said. But they went bankrupt in 2014. CEO died in a boating accident. Whole thing collapsed fast. Rachel began digging. She discovered Garrison had been subcontracted through a larger entity, Northbridge Urban Development. Shaw stared at the name, lips tightening. That's Caulfield's shell company. Rachel's heart pounded. 13 years ago, Michael had been arguing with Caulfield over the Brooklyn project. Now the company Caulfield used to hide assets had direct involvement with infrastructure beneath Union Square. And that's where Michael's jacket had been hidden. Shaw contacted a former city planner who remembered the utility retrofits. "That was a nightmare," the man said. Garrison crews came in fast, worked overnight, tight deadlines. A lot of us had questions. Questions like what? Shaw asked. Like why they were drilling so deep, installing sealed conduit vaults that weren't on the blueprints. It clicked. Rachel pieced it together. Michael had seen something, maybe in plans, permits, zoning maps, something that pointed to fraud or illegal construction. Maybe he confronted someone. Maybe he planned to go public, and then he disappeared. The sign structure, built in late 2010, had never been inspected internally. No reason to. It wasn't standard procedure, but now it seemed clear. Someone had hidden the jacket deliberately inside a sealed panel just out of sight. It wasn't random, it was a message. Rachel and Shaw returned to Union Square with a structural engineer. They examined the interior of the sign's support. Behind the metal, they found a hollow chamber, 6 inches wide, 2 feet deep. Inside, dusty and brittle, lay a fragment of paper stuck to the wall. They extracted it with care. It had once been folded. Moisture had faded the ink, but a few letters were visible. "Not safe, cow. They see everything. If anything happens to me." The rest had dissolved. It wasn't proof. It wasn't even legible enough for court. But it was real. Michael had left something behind. Rachel clutched the paper like a relic. "He tried to warn us," she said softly. And now, 13 years later, they had more than a theory. They had a trail. Detective Shaw stepped back into the case with the renewed intensity of someone who'd been waiting 13 years for a break. The jacket, the receipt, the crumpled note. They were enough to convince the department to reopen Michael's file officially. For the first time in over a decade, the cold case had heat. The first order of business. The sign. City engineers dismantled the structure, removing panels with forensic precision. No other artifacts were recovered, but Shaw remained convinced the placement wasn't accidental. Whoever hid the jacket wanted it found, eventually. Not immediately. Someone had timed the discovery. He revisited the alley, this time scanning every inch of the connecting path between it and the sign's location. Most of it ran beneath scaffolding and ventilation grates, but a section of concrete near the fence caught his eye, a repair job that didn't match the surrounding pavement. It was smoother, newer, and just slightly raised. He filed a request for records of street repairs in that area. The report showed a permit issued in November 2010, just 9 days after Michael disappeared. The reason cited, subsurface electrical hazard remediation. The contractor, Northbridge Urban Development. The name again. He ordered a ground scan. Engineers brought in a portable GPR unit. The data was slow to process, but what it revealed stopped Shaw cold. Underneath the concrete patch was a hollow pocket, roughly human-sized, shaped like a vertical crawl space. And inside, nestled in layers of crushed debris, was a small object, rusted but intact. A cufflink. Rachel recognized it before anyone else did. Michael had worn them to nearly every client meeting, silver with an angular A monogrammed into the face. She had given him the pair as a birthday gift in 2008. Now only one remained. The cufflink was sent to the lab. Preliminary analysis showed faint traces of skin cells embedded in the clasp. DNA tests were rushed. When the results came back, the evidence was irrefutable. The skin belonged to Michael Ainsley. The pocket beneath the concrete had been disturbed once, then sealed forever. But not by weather or accident, by intent. Shaw sat in the briefing room, hands folded tightly. "He was here," he said. "Whoever took him, whoever buried that piece of him, they worked fast, and they worked close." He meant proximity. The crime hadn't happened in some dark alley on the edge of the city. It happened feet away from thousands of people, under footsteps, beside benches, beneath signage. It had been hiding in noise and routine. Rachel sat quietly, staring at the photographs of the dig site. "Why leave the cufflink? Why leave the jacket?" Shaw replied without blinking. Because someone wanted us to find them, but only when it was too late to stop them. Forensics unearthed no human remains, but the implications were impossible to ignore. Michael had been there, maybe hurt, maybe worse. No blood was found in the cavity, but moisture and soil erosion over time had destroyed much of the biological trace. Still, the crime scene unit now officially classified the area as a disposal site. Rachel rejected the word. Disposal is what you do with garbage. That was my brother. She pressed for more investigation, more answers. Shaw began cross-referencing employee logs from Northbridge projects in 2010. That's when a name reappeared, Joseph Kiernan, a contractor who had supervised multiple sites across Manhattan for Northbridge, including the Union Square retrofit. Kiernan had died in 2016 in what was ruled a suicide, but at the time no one had connected him to Michael's case. Shaw now believed Kiernan had been one of the last people to see Michael alive. When he reviewed Kiernan's file, one detail stood out. His office had been located on 17th Street, overlooking the square, directly above the alley, right where the security footage had lost Michael. Someone watched it happen, Shaw muttered. Rachel's hands trembled. They buried him under the city. Shaw didn't answer, but in his notebook he wrote one final line beneath the growing web of evidence. He didn't disappear. He was erased. The discoveries in Union Square pushed the case into a new category. Not just a disappearance, but a probable homicide linked to institutional cover-up. Internal Affairs launched an inquiry. Federal investigators were notified. The question was no longer what happened to Michael Ainsley, but who allowed it to happen, and why. Shaw dug into Northbridge's old contracts. Most had been dissolved or sold off after the company's collapse, but the paper trail revealed patterns. Multiple infrastructure projects, fast-tracked zoning approvals, overlapping contractor licenses, many signed off under emergency measures or provisional permits, and at the center of several deals, Michael Ainsley. He hadn't just worked on the Brooklyn waterfront project. He'd reviewed zoning adjustments for at least 3 controversial developments between 2009 and 2010. In one file, buried deep in internal memos, Shaw found Michael's name listed as a technical reviewer for a utilities exception waiver, a document that allowed Northbridge to bypass public inspection protocols beneath Union Square. Rachel read it and went pale. "He was the one who caught it," she said. "He must have seen the discrepancies, the overreach, the permits that didn't line up, the sudden pressure to sign off without question. And if he pushed back, if he threatened to report it, that was motive." Shaw requested archived communications between Northbridge and the city zoning board. Some had been shredded. Others existed only as scanned PDFs with blacked-out lines. But a few escaped redaction. In one, an internal Northbridge email warned, "Ainsley's review is not guaranteed. If he stalls again, we escalate." Escalate. Not appeal, not negotiate. Escalate. Shaw brought it to the attention of federal investigators. Within days, subpoenas were issued for past executives of Northbridge and its parent company, Stanton Dynamics. One of those names was instantly familiar, Martin Caulfield. Caulfield had stayed mostly out of sight since 2012, investing in international properties, avoiding interviews, but now he was under formal scrutiny. Rachel wasn't surprised. "Michael told me he didn't trust him. Said the guy always had another layer, like you were never really seeing the whole face." In Caulfield's financial records, forensic accountants found a shell company registered under an alias used to funnel payments to consultants involved in Union Square's substructure. One of the consultants listed Joseph Kiernan. Shaw finally had the link. Michael had uncovered the fraud, and Kiernan, the site supervisor with direct access to the underground cavity where Michael's cufflink was found, had been on Caulfield's personal payroll. The implication was chilling. Kiernan had the motive, the means, the access, and now he was dead. Federal agents widened the scope. They examined other infrastructure contracts across Manhattan. Some matched the same fast-tracked patterns. 2 former city officials were quietly brought in for questioning. One refused to comment. The other admitted he'd been pressured by Northbridge to expedite approvals. Rachel sat through every briefing. Each layer pulled back revealed a network Michael had almost certainly seen coming. The receipt in his jacket, the sketch of the square, the note behind the sign. He had tried to document what he could in case he didn't survive. And he hadn't. But his legacy had. As the investigation spread, a second anomaly surfaced. A journalist named Linda Reyes had filed a FOIA request in late 2010 for zoning records tied to the Brooklyn development. She'd interviewed Michael once. Then she vanished from her byline. Shaw tracked her down. She now lived in Maine, working under a different name. When he found her, she looked shocked. "I thought I was the only one still thinking about him," she said. She confessed that after her request, someone had followed her. Her laptop was stolen. One night her apartment was broken into, nothing taken, except her notes on the zoning story. "I took the hint," she said. "I left the city, I left journalism." Shaw showed her the cufflink. She cried. Then she handed over the only thing she had left, a flash drive Michael had given her after their interview. He said, "If anything happens to me, make sure someone sees this." The files inside were encrypted, but Shaw already knew. This was no longer just a mystery. It was evidence. The flash drive was black, nondescript. It had no label, no marking. Shaw handed it off to the FBI's cybercrimes unit, and within 48 hours, the contents were decrypted. Inside was a folder titled Alt Plan Documents. Dozens of files, diagrams, emails, and permit applications. Many were blueprints of the Union Square infrastructure, some with notes in Michael's handwriting, others annotated with timestamps and color-coded highlights. But the real gold was in a subfolder marked Redline. It contained scanned memos between city officials and Northbridge, some of which clearly showed backdated approvals, forged sign-offs, and falsified safety assessments. One document bore a name no one expected, Councilman David Reiner. Reiner had served on the city's Development Oversight Committee in 2010. He'd since risen to state-level office. The files proved he had received campaign donations from shell entities tied to Stanton Dynamics, Caulfield's corporate umbrella. He had approved the fast-tracking of zoning changes that allowed for the Union Square installation, despite internal objections, and Michael had flagged it all. He wasn't just a concerned architect, he was a whistleblower. The flash drive also included a document labeled Final Statement. It wasn't signed, but it was unmistakably written by Michael. The file opened with a single line. "If you're reading this, I didn't walk away." He went on to describe the mounting pressure, the veiled threats, the sudden change in tone from clients and city partners. He suspected his communications were being monitored. He documented conversations with Kiernan and noted how Caulfield had started appearing in internal project threads without explanation. "I feel like I've stepped over a line I didn't know was there," the letter read, "and now I can't go back." Rachel read it alone, in silence. The words carved her open. Shaw turned the files over to federal prosecutors. Within days, indictments began to form. Caulfield's financial accounts were frozen. Former city officials were subpoenaed. Councilman Reiner was placed under federal investigation. The scope widened further. It turned out the zoning scandal wasn't isolated to Union Square or Red Hook. At least 7 other developments across the city showed signs of the same procedural manipulation. Michael had only scratched the surface, and someone had wanted that scratch buried forever. Meanwhile, Shaw continued reviewing the sketchbook Rachel had preserved all these years. On one page, dated just a week before the disappearance, Michael had drawn a map of the park with strange directional arrows. When overlaid with a recent blueprint from the flash drive, something clicked. The arrows pointed to a convergence of underground fiber optic lines, none of which were ever publicly disclosed. He took it to city engineers. "That wasn't supposed to exist," one said. "That junction box, it's off-grid." Off-grid, installed by Northbridge, signed off under an emergency power provision, untraceable to the average inspector, and located directly beneath the alley. That was the missing piece. Michael hadn't just been silenced because he was a nuisance. He had discovered a covert installation beneath Union Square, one that had no legal justification and potentially involved massive data infrastructure. Not just fraud, surveillance. Rachel met Shaw at the site that week. The city allowed a controlled excavation of the alley floor. What they found was astonishing. A sealed chamber with obsolete but once powerful server racks, ventilation shafts, and disconnected fiber ports. It had been abandoned for years, wiped clean. But traces of electromagnetic activity remained in the shielding. Whoever ran that system had shut it down, but not before Michael saw it. It changed everything. This wasn't just about development, Shaw said. This was control, information access. The theory emerged. Union Square's redevelopment had been a front for an illegal data network, one hidden beneath the busiest pedestrian hub in the city. Michael had seen enough to expose it, and that's when he became a threat. Rachel stood above the hollow site where the machines once hummed and whispered. He knew. And he tried to stop it. Shaw didn't speak. He simply nodded, watching the truth climb slowly from the dark. Rachel hadn't thought about Lila Jennings in years. After Michael's disappearance, she'd tried contacting her, but every call went to voicemail. The last time anyone had seen Lila was at a gallery opening 2 weeks before Michael vanished. Then she disappeared, quietly, without forwarding addresses, without notice. Now a digital investigator working alongside the federal team uncovered something unexpected. Lila was living in Vermont under a different name. She'd changed jobs, cut ties with former friends, and legally altered her last name in 2011. Rachel couldn't make sense of it. Why would Lila run? Shaw arranged a meeting. When they arrived, Lila looked shocked, but not surprised. Her eyes lingered on the folder in Shaw's hands before a word was spoken. She invited them inside and sat at the edge of a worn armchair, wringing her fingers. "You're here about Michael," she said. Rachel nodded. "You knew what happened." "I didn't know," Lila whispered. "I only knew something might happen." She explained everything. About 3 weeks before Michael disappeared, he had started acting withdrawn. Not fearful, just distant. He began locking his work materials in a safe at home. He stopped answering personal emails. One night he told her, "If I'm right, I've stepped on something bigger than I meant to." She tried pressing for answers, but he deflected. Then one night, 6 days before Union Square, he handed her a flash drive. "He told me, Tom, don't look at it. Not yet. Only if I disappear." "Did you?" Shaw asked. "I waited a year," Lila said. "Then I plugged it in. It was encrypted. I didn't know how to crack it, so I put it away. When I saw what happened to that journalist, Linda, I thought maybe I was next." So she ran. Rachel was torn between rage and understanding. "You could have told someone." "I was terrified," Lila said. "I thought if they knew I had it." Shaw didn't scold her. He understood fear, especially fear wrapped in isolation. He asked for the drive. Lila retrieved it from a lockbox under her stairs. It was identical to the one Linda Reyes had received, but this one held a different set of files. Encrypted, yes, but when the FBI's team decrypted them, they found a series of logs that read like a diary. Michael had been documenting his thoughts in detail, fears, suspicions, things he'd overheard. The entries began in September 2010. Caulfield pushed hard today. Once the zoning waiver approved by Monday, said it's non-negotiable. Kiernan's crew showed up without clearance. They said they're just doing what they're told. I don't buy it. Found a junction box schematic that doesn't match the final design. No one will tell me who approved it. The entries grew darker over time. Rachel doesn't know. I can't involve her. But I've started sleeping at the office. 3 people from zoning have stopped returning calls. Something's happening. And then, the final entry. "I don't think I'm paranoid. I think I'm just late. If I disappear, let them know. Union Square is just the beginning." Rachel read those words over and over. He hadn't just vanished. He had walked toward it, eyes open. The files also included schematics for a planned expansion of the underground chamber beneath Union Square, designs that had never been filed with the city. This wasn't a one-time installation. It had been a pilot, a prototype. There were placeholders for future phases labeled Terminal West, Battery Loop, and Astoria Node. Rachel stared at the map. This was going to be a network. Shaw agreed. Not of data, of control, a hidden grid under the city cloaked as infrastructure. The implications were staggering. Caulfield and his partners hadn't just manipulated development, they'd weaponized it. Through zoning, they'd buried technology designed to extract, monitor, store, and no one had known until Michael pieced it together. Rachel exhaled slowly. He was the only one who understood the full pattern. Lila, quietly crying now, nodded. And he tried to protect me. Even in the end, Rachel reached across the table and held her hand. You're not running anymore. And for the first time in over a decade, Lila stopped shaking. The documents from the second flash drive, combined with the evidence already gathered, formed the basis for a sweeping federal case. Subpoenas expanded. A special task force was created. What had started as a cold case was now the centerpiece of one of the most complex white-collar investigations in New York City history. Rachel sat in the federal courthouse as agents presented their findings. The room buzzed with urgency, but beneath the legal jargon and procedural mechanics was one undeniable truth. Michael had been right. He had uncovered the early stages of a covert surveillance network, masked by zoning approvals and hidden in plain sight. And he had paid for it with his life. Shaw watched as names were added to the indictments. Former city contractors, middlemen, engineers. Most notable among them was Henry Voss, a longtime associate of Caulfield and an executive at Stanton Dynamics. His name had appeared in at least 9 email threads Michael flagged. He was the one who had signed off on the shell companies used to reroute infrastructure contracts, and he was the one who authorized payment to Kiernan the week Michael vanished. Voss was arrested in Connecticut at 6:42 a.m. on a rainy Monday. Hours later, Caulfield's attorney issued a statement. My client has no knowledge of any wrongdoing and maintains full cooperation with authorities. But Rachel knew better. She stood before a press conference later that week and read directly from Michael's final entry. Let them know. Union Square is just the beginning. The effect was immediate. Public support surged. Protests formed around City Hall, demanding resignations. Rachel was invited to testify before a state ethics committee, and though her voice trembled, her words didn't. He wasn't an activist. He wasn't looking for a fight. But when he saw something broken, he couldn't look away. Shaw, sitting silently in the back, scribbled one final note in his book. Legacy begins where silence ends. As the case unfolded, the city began a quiet review of other development zones. Investigators found more anomalies, similar permits, overlapping contractor names, strangely aligned timelines. Nothing as centralized or expansive as the Union Square installation, but enough to confirm Michael's fear. It was never meant to stop with him. Meanwhile, Rachel received a call from the Department of Justice. The files from the flash drives were being used as key evidence in multiple ongoing cases. The system Michael had uncovered, the secret grid beneath the square, was referred to internally as Tier 9. It had been designed as an adaptive monitoring system, an experimental prototype meant to quietly observe human behavior at scale. Movement patterns, phone signal frequencies, even biometric shifts through environmental sensors. None of it had been approved by public oversight. And none of it had been disclosed. Rachel felt like she was walking through a dream. 13 years earlier, she'd begged strangers to look at a missing persons flyer. Now she was being thanked by senators, cited in legislative proposals, and called a symbol of civic accountability. But none of it brought Michael back. On the night of the first public hearing, Rachel stood alone at Union Square. She stared at the spot where the sign once stood, the very place where Michael's jacket had been hidden. Now a small bronze plaque had been affixed to the base of the new pole. It read, "In memory of Michael Ainsley, architect, citizen, witness. Disappeared. November 2nd, 2010. Found in the truth he left behind." A cyclist stopped, read it, and bowed his head. A woman snapped a photo. Rachel placed a folded piece of paper at the foot of the plaque, a copy of his final statement, just the first line visible. If you're reading this, I didn't walk away. Shaw joined her minutes later, hands in his pockets. You did it. No, she said. He did. The wind moved gently through the square. Traffic lights blinked in the distance. And for the first time in over a decade, Rachel felt something that had eluded her for years. Not peace, not justice, but meaning. And that, finally, was enough. As legal proceedings gained momentum, a new discovery shifted the case once again. A forensic team, still combing through the old Garrison utility archives, found a structural blueprint for the Union Square site labeled Contingency Module A. Buried in the margins was a note referencing a sealed void emergency access patch, marked for maintenance in December 2010. It had never been serviced. Shaw requested immediate excavation. The location aligned precisely with the earlier hollow cavity where Michael's cufflink had been found, but this time they went deeper. Just beneath the first layer of fill was a reinforced hatch, welded shut, nearly invisible to surface scans. It took 2 hours to breach. What they found inside stopped the entire crew. It was a compartment, 5 feet high, 8 feet long, lined with soundproof insulation, airless, lightless. And in the center, embedded into the wall, were shallow claw marks etched into the metal. There were no remains, but there were clear signs of occupancy: scratches, fibers, skin oils, a torn button. The lab confirmed it. The button matched the suit Michael wore the day he disappeared. Rachel received the news quietly. She didn't speak for several minutes, just nodded slowly. They put him in a box, she said, like he wasn't even human. The compartment was ruled a secondary containment unit, possibly used as a temporary holding cell. But who would have access to something like that? Who would know it existed? The answer came in the form of an anonymous tip. A retired construction foreman from the Stanton Dynamics contracting division came forward. He didn't want to go public, but he spoke under protection. He claimed that in October 2010, he oversaw a rushed night crew instructed to build a utility safe beneath Union Square, an enclosed space for asset security during Phase 1 testing. When asked if he'd ever seen Michael Ainsley, he went pale. I didn't know his name, he said, but I saw them drag someone in. He wasn't fighting, just dazed. They told us not to look. His testimony led to a federal investigation into off-book labor contracts and contingency protocols used by Stanton Dynamics for more than a decade. It was the final link. Michael had been taken, confined, silenced, not by accident, not by opportunists, by design. As Rachel processed this, Shaw met her on the west side of Union Square. The dig site had been sealed again, now marked as evidence. The air still carried dust and the scent of concrete and rust. He didn't run, Shaw said. He didn't fall. He was placed. Rachel turned toward the plaza. And now we know where. The evidence brought an avalanche of accountability. Voss, under pressure, accepted a plea deal. He admitted knowledge of the illegal installation. He confirmed that Kiernan had acted under his orders, that Caulfield had been briefed, that Michael had been flagged as non-compliant and was to be neutralized with discretion. Those words shattered what little plausible deniability remained. The city issued a statement acknowledging historic corruption in infrastructure oversight and pledged reforms. Caulfield resigned from all board positions. Reiner withdrew from public office. But none of it brought resolution. Rachel refused to call it justice. Justice would have meant Michael walking home that night. Instead, she pushed for one final act, an official reclassification of the case. Michael Ainsley, no longer missing, now presumed murdered in connection with a multi-agency conspiracy. The coroner's office issued a symbolic certificate of death, no date, no body, but at last, a name. That night, Rachel returned to the signpost where the first clue was found. She stood beside the plaque, now illuminated by a city-funded memorial light. She placed a single white flower at its base. For 13 years, she had searched. Now, she remembered. And in remembering, she reclaimed what had been stolen, not just her brother's truth, but his dignity. Shaw watched from a distance. There was nothing left to investigate, but everything left to feel. 13 years had passed since Michael vanished in the heart of New York City. What began as a mysterious disappearance had become a sweeping revelation, exposing corruption, conspiracy, and hidden crimes beneath Union Square itself. But beyond the headlines, beyond the indictments and trials, was a quieter, more personal resolution. Rachel returned to Union Square on November the 2nd, exactly 13 years since Michael had last been seen. The city had organized a remembrance ceremony. Hundreds gathered around the memorial plaque, holding candles that flickered in the cold evening air. Rachel stood silently, watching faces she'd never met share tears for a man they'd never known. In the crowd, Detective Shaw waited, observing quietly. His role had ended. The case was closed. But Michael's story had changed him, reminded him why he'd joined the force. Not for statistics or quotas, but for the people who'd been left behind. Rachel stepped forward as the crowd hushed. Her voice was clear, gentle, but strong. For years, Michael was a question mark, an unsolved mystery that defined our family. But today, we remember him not just for what happened here, but for the truth he fought to reveal. The crowd was silent, attentive. Strangers nodded softly. Michael believed in honesty, integrity. He believed the city could be better, fairer, more just. He paid for that belief with his life, but his death changed things. He uncovered something hidden, something wrong, and forced us to look, not away, but directly at it. She paused briefly, gathering herself. He didn't walk away. He stood firm. And now, we stand here, because of him. The ceremony ended quietly with no applause. Only silence, punctuated by the gentle sound of city life in the background. Later, Shaw approached Rachel, standing by the memorial. "You know," Shaw said softly, "most cold cases never end. They fade. But Michael's story won't." Rachel looked at him, grateful yet solemn. "It can't," she replied, "because it's not just his story. It belongs to everyone who refuses to look away." Shaw nodded, understanding deeply. If nothing else, he made us all look closer. Rachel smiled faintly. He always did. As the evening deepened, Rachel stood alone once more, staring at the plaque. She spoke quietly to Michael, as she had countless times before, feeling closer to him now than she ever had in life. "You did it, Michael. You exposed them, and I won't let anyone forget." Then, quietly, almost as a whisper, she added, "You never vanished. You were right here all along." Across the square, beneath new street lamps and carefully maintained pavement, the city had changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but noticeably. Procedures were more transparent, whistleblowers more protected. Infrastructure projects rigorously audited. Michael's legacy was visible in small but significant ways, in oversight committees, in legal reforms, in the way city officials hesitated slightly before signing permits. Rachel felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. A young woman holding a candle stood beside her, eyes damp. "I didn't know your brother, but I read about him. I wanted you to know. I applied to law school because of him. I want to make sure this never happens again." Rachel hugged her, briefly overwhelmed. This was Michael's true legacy, not headlines, not memorial plaques, but people inspired by courage, moved to act, to speak, to stand. Rachel finally felt it clearly and completely. Peace. Not closure in the traditional sense, Michael's absence would always ache, but a sense of purpose, of clarity. His story, tragic as it was, had mattered. Before leaving, Rachel addressed one final request to those watching, those who would hear this story again and again, long after this night had faded into memory. If Michael's story touched you, if it inspired you, please subscribe to this channel. Help us share more stories like his, stories that matter, stories that can change things. She glanced toward the plaque one last time, then looked directly forward, her voice steady. And now click on the video appearing on your screen to keep uncovering truths that deserve to be told. Don't look away, because the next story you hear might change everything. With that, Rachel stepped away from the memorial and into the city Michael had never truly left behind. because truth, once seen, cannot vanish.